Releasing Trauma is sponsored by the Global Association for Trauma Recovery. The Global Association for Trauma Recovery is a social impact organization serving as a resource for survivors and their families, dedicated to facilitating change by spreading trauma-related awareness and thus creating a more trauma-informed world. Learn more at gaftr.org. Welcome to Releasing Trauma, a Survivor's Podcast. I am your host, Tracy Osborne. I am a survivor of emotional bullying, rape, sexual assault, domestic abuse, and grief. After losing my husband in 2019, I set off on a new adventure to help other women release their trauma and create a life they can cherish. Each week, I will feature a guest expert or a survivor to share their stories, tips, wisdom, and more. The goal is so that you can take away even just the smallest nugget of information you can use in your life right now to make a change, and to remind you that you're not alone. There is life after trauma, and you can move from victim to thriver and create a life you can cherish. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. I am your host, Tracy Osborne. With me today is Radha Ruparell, and we're going to be talking about how to live powerfully after, trauma. So I'm excited to get into this topic. Radha, thank you so much for joining us today.
Good to be with you, Tracy.
So, I usually start off the show with having our guests tell us a little bit about their story. So why don't we start there? Tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, sure. So maybe I'll start before the big event happened, but just a little bit about myself. What I do for a living is I work with leaders around the world to grow their leadership. So CEOs, executives, social entrepreneurs, and a lot of the work that I do with them is around understanding themselves, understanding how to deal with uncertainty, being able to listen powerfully to ourselves. And one of the things that I believe about this work is it's deeply personal. And that came to life for me last year at the peak of the global pandemic. It was April 2020 when I faced the most difficult experience of my life. So I felt very deeply ill with COVID. And this was, Tracy, at the beginning of the pandemic. I didn't know anyone else who had fallen sick. It was New York City. The hospitals were overrun. And I went through, a couple of months where I dealt with such crazy symptoms happening to my body. I didn't even know if I was going to make it. And then the next few months, luckily, I got through the worst part of it, but I became one of those long haulers who never fully recovered. And while I'm much better today, to this day, I'm still dealing with some of the lingering symptoms from getting sick over a year and a half ago.
Wow. So I can't imagine how terrifying that is to actually have COVID and be that sick. And two of my daughters have gotten it, and it was kind of like just having a mild flu for them. They felt achy and all of that, and kind of lost their taste. But within a week, they were fine. They were back to normal. So to have it so severe that you're, here we are a year and a half later, you're still dealing with it. That's got to be completely life-changing.
Yeah, it really has been, Tracy. And that's the thing that caught me off guard. Like, just to paint the picture, before I got sick, I was in the best shape of my life. I was surfing, I was playing tennis, I was running, I was just mentally feeling really great. And then all of a sudden, this hit me. And I just didn't see it coming. And it was completely unexpected. And so much of what I've had to deal with this year, not just those first initial months, those were tough, but like you said, for this last year is dealing with the disruption to my life and learning that life is not as I know it, and how to deal with that on a daily basis. So that's been my reality.
Did it kind of give you a new perspective on life, almost like a, live in the moment, not worry so much about things? Did it do that for you?
Yes. In the first couple of months, I was just trying to make it through the next minute or the next hour. But you're spot on, Tracy. I mean, I say this now, but in some ways it's been the biggest gift. And, again, I say that with, wanting some of my old health back, and I miss that. But at the same time, like, here's how it's been a gift. After a month in isolation, and I was at home alone in New York in my apartment, just dealing with these crazy symptoms. A month after I finally was allowed to go outside, I was told I'm not infectious. And I remember, Tracy, I went outside, and outside of my apartment, there's this bed of flowers. And it's probably been there for the 6 years that I've lived there, and I've never noticed it before. And all of a sudden, I just started waking up to all the things around me that I had taken for granted. The taking a breath of fresh air, when for months I had struggled to take a breath. Taking a walk, like I have a local park, Tracy, 5 minutes away from me, and I'd only gone there a handful of times. Now I go there every day, and I'm just present to walking. And I think finally being with people, we're in these like busy lives. We're go, go, go. And now when I'm with people in my life, I'm just able to be present. I appreciate the moments I have with them. And so that's just been eye-opening for me. That and the counterintuitive thing, Tracy, is one of the biggest symptoms that I dealt with was deep waves of fatigue. And so when I started to get better, for the first few months, I would work for an hour, but then I'd have to rest for an hour, work for an hour, and then I'd have to lie down for an hour. So in some ways I lost time, but because I was just so present in the moments that I had, it almost felt like time expanded.
I can understand that. It's almost like when you're fully present in the moment, time just kind of slows down or almost stands still.
Yes. Yeah.
I find that those. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, and you just start noticing the things around you that you've taken for granted, But please go ahead, Tracy.
Oh no, I was just going to say, I find that those are the times that I am like super productive and able to get, whatever it is I need to do, whether it's just working or, taking care of the house or, even if it's just sitting and watching TV. I find that when I'm in those moments fully present, I don't know. I don't even know really how to explain it. It's almost like I just, I feel life. I feel alive, and I just want to go and I want to experience.
Yeah, isn't it? I love that. Like, you feel alive, you feel at ease, you feel in flow. And I think that's something that I'm discovering, is that that's possible. And some of it just comes from slowing down and just opening our eyes and noticing. And Tracy, another thing that you said, it really did open up for me, was letting go of fear. Because when you go through the most terrifying experience in your life, then the other things that you were afraid of don't seem fearful anymore. So, one of the things, when I was a kid, I used to love to write. And I'm laughing because I went to visit my family, and my mom pulled out a book that I wrote about rabbits when I was 10 years old. And for 20 years, I said I want to write, and I never did anything about it. When I was sick, one night when I was having a bout of insomnia, I just started writing and processing my thoughts, but also some of the lessons I learned along the way. And that night I thought, my God, I started writing a book. Now, in my old life, when I was more afraid, I would never have shared something like that with anyone, especially after a night of crazy insomnia. But the next morning I woke up and I shared it with a colleague of mine. And I said, you know what? I'm afraid to share this because it's putting myself out there in the world, but I want to share something with you. And she gave me so much encouragement that a few months later, I had published a book. And again, it's just, I had let go of all the fear of embarrassment, all the fear of sharing a piece of myself, because again, when you think your time is up, it just changes your perspective on everything. The smaller things don't seem scary anymore.
It's, you're more able to feel vulnerable
Yeah.
Without having, like you said, that fear of judgment, of putting yourself out there, of all of that. I know I went through a point last year in the COVID pandemic where I can't remember what part of it. I think it was probably around the summertime. I actually was, sitting here, and I posted on social media. I'm like, I'm just sitting here thinking about all this, and I'm like, do I need to write letters to my kids? Because we didn't know anything that much about it, and all we saw was the media, telling us that people are dropping like flies, and I'm sitting here thinking, my God, people are going in the hospital. They don't have a chance to say goodbye to their loved ones. Do I need to write letters to my kids? I mean, I was terrified.
Yeah.
And then I decided, I wasn't going to live my life in fear of something that I may or may not ever get. And that I was, going to continue my life and take the proper precautions and everything, of course. But, when we live in fear, we just miss out on so much.
You're so right, Tracy. It's such a debilitating emotion. Although one of the things that I've learned is to embrace multiple emotions. So sometimes I am afraid, and then I am optimistic too. And I'm learning to just be with, okay, sometimes I have fear, but the fear doesn't define me. It's not I'm afraid. I have some fear right now.
Sure.
But I think you're just so right. Like when we can notice it, and it's so incredible, Tracy, that at that time you just paused, you noticed it, you actually expressed it. And sometimes what I've learned when we have fear, and there's people in my life who did such a good job of this for me, is when someone listens to you and just hears your fear and gives you a space to express it, sometimes that's all it takes for it to disappear. And so I just love that even when you were having that thought, that you just shared it with the world. And maybe in doing that, it disappeared for you, and it created the space to open up to, okay, so now what am I going to do with my precious life?
Right. And it's okay to have fear. I'm not saying you should never be afraid. Fear is healthy. What's not healthy is when you're living in a constant state of fear, and it's affecting your everyday life. You're not living.
Yeah, exactly. And I think one of the things that you said before, Tracy, that I want to pick up on is this idea of vulnerability and sharing. I grew up and I thought that being strong means toughing it out, doing it on your own, not expressing what's there for you. That reaching out for help might be a sign of weakness. And everything that I thought I knew to be true turned on its head in the past year, because what I realized is that actually when we can kind of take off our invisible masks and share ourselves with other people, there's just so much strength in that. And there's so much strength in that vulnerability. And connection has been one of the biggest things that's helped me through my own trauma. And when I've shared my story with others, the most beautiful thing is so many people then share their stories with me. And when we start connecting with each other and we realize, okay, we all have fears, we all have worries, but we all have strengths and we all have hopes. I don't know, it's so powerful. And again, I think in those spaces, so much of our fear disappears because we realize we're just not alone. It just means we're human.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my favorite things about sharing my story and putting myself out there and being so vulnerable is that it gives others the opportunity to do the same, and the safe space to do the same. And that's one of the reasons why I do this show, is to provide that safe space for people to come on and talk about their traumas and talk about how they healed and that kind of thing, and to just let our listeners and everybody know that it's okay. Life is going to happen. It's going to knock you down, but that doesn't mean that it has to be the end all be all. There is light after the darkness. There's hope after trauma.
Yeah.
It's so powerful.
It is so powerful. And I just love this idea that you're creating a safe space. And I think about what would it, I do work in education. So actually we do a lot of work, we're doing a lot more work with teachers now to understand trauma and also intergenerational trauma,
Oh,
oftentimes
yeah.
in war-driven countries. And I think about some of the strongest teachers I know, and one of the things that they do is they're committed to creating a safe space for their students to heal, for their students to share. I also, we try to do this in our workplace, and I'm starting to see more and more workplaces embracing this. And I just think it's so important because if we don't have these spaces, it's almost like we're disconnected from one another. We're dealing with our things alone and we think we're the only ones. And spaces like this just remind us, no, we're not alone. In fact, we're so deeply interconnected. And that can be so healing.
Absolutely. What are some of the things that you discovered over your journey the past year and a half as you're healing really helped you to get through the mental and emotional trauma, not just the physical trauma, but the internal trauma?
Yeah. So, we talked about one, which was connection. So I won't go there right now. But one of the other things that's really helped me, and I'm very present to it right now because it's something I realize I need to practice on a daily basis, and it's self-compassion. And I think we talk about compassion, and I believe it starts with ourselves. And so, Tracy, how this shows up for me is, again, even months later, there are times when I get both physically and mentally fatigued in the middle of a workday, and I need to lie down. And sometimes in the early days when that happened, I would get so frustrated with myself, especially if I'd been doing well for a little while. And especially as I looked around, because, as you said, some people recovered from this in 1 week or 2 weeks. And I think to myself, and I think this is a horrible thing to do, comparison. I think it's one of the things that kills us in our society. But, I was in such a tired state that I would say to myself, why am I not recovering quickly? And so even when I was lying down to get rest, which was important to my recovery, mentally, I wasn't resting because I was getting frustrated at myself. Why am I not getting better? Like, why can't I power through this? I work with other people to develop their inner strength. What's wrong with me? These were the stories I was telling myself. And so one of the things that I have developed is practices around self-compassion, and they've just changed my life. One of the practices is something called a loving kindness meditation, where just for 5 minutes every night, I repeat to myself a few phrases, first for myself, then for a loved one in my life, then for a stranger, and then for someone who's giving me angst. And it's just simply, may I be happy, may I be healthy, may I live with ease. And then I do that for somebody else, and then I do that for a good friend, do that for a stranger, and then I do that for someone who's giving me angst. And just in 5 minutes, I can tell you there's so much release. And I think that first part of it is just holding myself with some compassion and just saying, may I be free. And usually it's in those moments that if I've been judging myself or frustrated myself, I just let it go. And in that, I also find compassion for others around me.
I love that you brought up the self-compassion, because I find that is so crucial to our healing from trauma, because we are so hard on ourselves. No matter what kind of trauma we have faced, we are so much worse on ourselves. And so learning that self-compassion and learning that it's okay to be human, it's okay to take a rest when you need it, or to not do things perfectly, to fail and learn from it. All of that is okay. And it's just part of being human. But we're just coded in our DNA, I think, to just be so harsh and judgmental on ourselves when we're not perfect.
Exactly. And it's this idea of perfection.
Yeah.
And how can we be perfect in times of uncertainty when our lives are getting upended? It's almost, one of the other lessons I've learned is it's not the uncertainty that kills us, it's our resistance to it.
Yes.
Right? And what we resist persists. And so sometimes we're judging ourselves because we're in this new environment and we're dealing with the new things that we have no idea how to deal with. And I loved what you said around just this idea of how do we approach them. And one of the things that I'm learning, actually I learned it, I have 6 nieces and nephews under the age of 10. Actually, one just turned 10 a couple of days ago, so I can't even say that anymore. But I learned so much from them. And one of the biggest things I've learned from them is play, right? Anytime they're approaching something, they approach it with play, right? They're riding their bikes, they fall down, they get back up again, and they laugh. And somehow, as adults, we've lost the capacity to do that. And so now I'm taking a page out of their book and I'm trying to be playful. Like, when I was first very sick and I couldn't get out of bed, I just did something that they used to do. They'd put on music really loud first thing in the morning. So I'd put on like a Bollywood Bhangra dance tune, and all of a sudden I'd see myself getting out of bed. Or, in a more serious note, like just taking a playful attitude when you have a setback. Like instead of saying, oh my gosh, like, why can't I go for a long walk today? Yesterday, I was able to get my stamina up. I just laugh at myself and I say, there you go again, Radha, judging yourself. And I chuckle a little bit at myself, and it kind of diffuses the significance of it all.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It kind of turns it a little lighthearted. And I love the idea of play. We don't do that enough as adults. It's like once we hit the age of 18 or 25, all of a sudden we have to grow up and be serious all the time. And that's not what life is about.
I know, right? I know. It's so silly. It's life is meant to be fun and it's meant to be joyous. And it doesn't mean that it's going to be like that all the time. And I think, of course, that more than anyone else, creating this program, like we will have suffering, but when we can, why not have immense joy as well? Humor is another thing that's helped me through this. I remember in my early days when I was sick, a good friend of mine, she would make movie recommendations. And one day, finally, I was able to sit up long enough to watch Roman Holiday. And I remember that day I laughed so hard. Like Audrey Hepburn was making me laugh so hard. And I didn't realize it. I thought talking was going to help, or writing was going to help, or exercising. But you know what I needed? I just needed a good chuckle. And I was just laughing outside, laughing out loud to myself in my apartment. I could hear myself roaring with laughter. And it was just so, so great. And I just think sometimes when life is serious, it's sometimes the antidote is actually just a lot of play and laughter.
I love that. There's nothing like a good laugh, that kind where you just got tears streaming down your face and you can't breathe.
Yes.
Those are awesome times. Well, Radha, thank you so much. Tell us a little bit more about your book. You mentioned it in the beginning, but tell us a little bit more about it.
Sure. Yeah. So the book is called Brave Now, Rise Through Struggle and Unlock Your Greatest Self. And really the book is about, the first chapter is my story of what I dealt with in my trauma. The next 19 chapters are just practical lessons around how do you discover your inner strength? Because what I believe, Tracy, is that all of us have this inner strength and wisdom inside us, and we just need to cultivate it. And when we do, not only can we be resilient, but we can feel more connected with others. We can live into new possibilities, and we can find lives of compassion and contribution. And so in some ways, it's all these lessons I've been working with leaders on for the last 20 years, right? How do you deal with uncertainty? How do you take away your mask and connect with people in deeper ways? How do you discover your purpose? But I share some of that through the story that I went through. And so, if anyone is just looking for just some tiny nuggets or ideas or practices around how to live powerfully, check out the book Brave Now.
Awesome, thank you. And how can our listeners find you on the web?
Yeah, so you can find me at bravenowbook.com. That's my personal website. Or you can check out the book itself at Brave Now. You can purchase it at Amazon.
Fantastic. And listeners, I will have everything down in the show notes. If you're listening from one of our partner stations, just head over to releasingtraumapodcast.com, pull up Radha's show and all her contact information, the link to the book, everything will be there. Thank you so much for coming on and talking with us today and sharing a little bit about your story. And, giving us some good tips and reminding us that play is essential and self-compassion is crucial.
Yeah, good to be with you, Tracy. And it's always nice to get a reminder myself. I'm leaving this conversation with a smile on my face.
Fantastic. So am I, actually. So that's great. Listeners, thank you as always for tuning in, and we will talk to you in the next show.